Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Steven Fennell? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. This case takes place on Macleay Island, which is near Brisbane, Australia. This small island, which is only accessible by ferry, is home to about 3,500 residents. In 2012, one of those residents was 85-year-old Lizelott Watson. She was a retired nurse who lived in a two-story house on Alastair Court. Lizelott kept her house extremely clean. One friend described it as immaculate. In recent years, she had difficulty with walking and accepted assistance from various people to compensate. One of these people was a convicted criminal named Steven Mark John Fennell. He had racked up 41 convictions from 1978 to 1993, mostly from con artist-type crimes like fraud. In 1995, he was convicted in connection with attacking his then-girlfriend. He went to prison for 1 year and 4 months. Based on a description that the victim offered about Steven's crime, he should have been there for at least 10 years. According to her, he tied her up and repeatedly beat her. Supposedly, Steven put his life of crime behind him. By 2012, he was married to a woman named Helen and had a son. Steven helped Lizelott with various tasks like banking, shopping, and yard work. He visited her house frequently. He typically stayed there for about 15 to 20 minutes at a time. To make a living, Steven had contracts with a few different businesses to deliver pamphlets. He made these so-called junk mail deliveries on a Honda motorbike. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On Monday, November 12, 2012, at around 9:30 a.m., two witnesses saw Lizelott near her house. This was the last time she would ever be seen alive. She failed to answer telephone calls during that afternoon. On Tuesday, November 13, Steven drove to the residence of a local police officer, arriving at around 3:30 to 3:45 p.m. Steven said that he had gone to visit Lizelott, but she did not answer the door. He was concerned for her well-being and worried that she may have fallen and injured herself. Steven and the officer made their way to Lizelott's house. The officer entered through an unlocked side door and found Lizelott dead in her bedroom. It was clear she had been murdered. Here's what the police found during the investigation that followed. Lizelott had been attacked with a blunt weapon. Her body was found on the floor next to her bed. It appeared as though she had been beaten repeatedly on the back of the head. There was blood in several places, including on her pillow, the wall, a clock radio, a table, and on a curtain. She had a few defensive injuries to her forearm, wrist, and fingers. Some of the injuries were in the shape of a crescent. Investigators thought that maybe a hammer had been used to kill her. Lizelott's house was in disarray, like someone had ransacked it. Drawers and cabinets were open, and her belongings were scattered everywhere. It appeared as though the killer had been looking for something in the house. Only $290 in cash was found, which was not much considering it was common knowledge Lizelott kept large sums of cash in her house. On November 15, 2012, 3 days after the murder and 2 days after Lizelott's body was found, a witness came forward to the police and told them about an interesting discovery. On November 10, 2 days before the murder, she had been walking her dogs in a place called Thompson Point. She saw a shaving bag sitting in the mud. The bag contained a rock and a folder of bank documents, including receipts for recent cash withdrawals from the bank. Lizelott's name was on the documents. It was clear from where the bag was located and the fact that there was a rock in the bag that somebody wanted it to disappear. They did not anticipate that it would wash up near the shore. The police immediately searched the area and found a black purse and a green wallet, both of which belonged to Lizelott. They also found a claw hammer about 45 feet away. Not surprisingly, Steven Fennell was a potential suspect in the murder. He claimed to have some memory problems due to a brain injury he sustained in a house explosion over 30 years earlier. With the help of his wife and a diary that he kept, Steven assembled an account of his movements around the time of the murder. Steven indicated that on Monday, November 12, his wife went to a craft class at 8:30 a.m. and returned at 12:30 p.m. At about 9:30 a.m., Steven called Liselott, but no one picked up. He went to her house and knocked on the door, but she didn't answer. He left a tin that he borrowed from her at her door before making his way home. Steven did not remember exactly when he visited her house, or if he returned later. At this point, Steven engaged in a few activities like cleaning his kitchen and making telephone calls. Steven left his house at around 3 p.m. to return a DVD and to visit a friend. He returned home at 5:45 p.m. and had dinner at 6 p.m. Steven did not leave his house that night. On Tuesday, November 13, he left a note in Liselott's mailbox saying that he would be away for the day. He then left the island and engaged in various activities like delivering pamphlets. The police were able to corroborate Steven's account of his movements, but there were 3 problems. 1, there was a time for which he could not account. 2, Steven admitted going to Liselott's house. And 3, on Monday, November 12, he was captured on video surveillance gambling at a place called Pub Paradise. He was there from 3:49 p.m. to 4:43 p.m. It appeared as though he was trying to keep his gambling habit a secret. Investigators believe that after Steven arrived at Pub Paradise, all his time was accounted for throughout the rest of the day on Monday and all day Tuesday. If Steven was involved in the murder, he must have killed Liselott between 9:30 a.m. on November 12, when she was spotted by witnesses, and before 3:49 p.m. that same day, when Steven was captured on video surveillance at Pub Paradise. That was the only window of time available. The Crown believed that Steven had stolen money from Liselott and was worried about getting caught. Murdering her was a way to escape responsibility. On November 16, 2012, Steven was arrested. In March of 2013, he was charged with murder. He went on trial 3 years later. It lasted for 15 days. On March 21, 2016, Steven was found guilty of murder. His sentence was life in prison. On September 11, 2019, the High Court of Australia entered a verdict of acquittal. The court ruled that there was insufficient evidence to prove Steven's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Several other people had both the motive and the opportunity to murder Liselott. The court said that the evidence linking Steven to the hammer was weak. In addition, he didn't have much motive or opportunity. In Australia, double jeopardy is not absolute. Steven can be charged again if new and compelling evidence emerges. Now moving to my analysis. Steven Fennell maintains his innocence, and he was acquitted. The Crown, of course, believes that he is guilty. They are not looking for any other suspects. This brings me to the question, did Steven Fennell murder Liselott Watson? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that Steven was guilty of murder, starting with the inculpatory factors. Steven's criminal history suggests that he is no stranger to separating people from their money by using manipulation and fraud. In addition, he had been convicted of being violent toward a woman. It seems odd that someone with Steven's background would choose to hang around Liselott out of the goodness of his heart. Steven's memory problems manifested at inconvenient times, like when he failed to remember exactly when he visited Liselott's house on November 12. Steven was extremely familiar with Liselott's house and could have gained access to it without forcing entry. Steven had helped Liselott with her banking. The banking documents found 2 days before the murder at Thompson Point had been in Steven's possession several days earlier. This strongly undermines the unknown intruder theory. How would a random burglar have disposed of the banking documents prior to the murder? The timing doesn't make sense. Only a person connected to the victim could have hidden the documents or would have possessed any interest in hiding them. A claw hammer was found at Thompson Point, not far from where Liselott's banking documents were discovered. This connects the hammer to Steven because the documents were connected to Steven. In addition, a man named Robert, who knew Steven, claimed that the hammer had originally belonged to him. Robert said that he had loaned Steven the hammer a year or two before the murder. He tried to get the hammer back, but Steven said that he lost it. On Monday, November 12, at 7:47 a.m., someone using the username Steven logged into a computer in Steven's house and clicked on a link on the Yahoo homepage for an article titled "Weird Places People Hide Money Around the Home." Lieselot hid cash in her house, and she told her daughter that $200 or $300 had gone missing. Steven lied to the police about gambling on November 12. During that gambling session, he lost $1,207. Steven's income was similar to his expenditures, and he did not have a lot of money in savings. Where was he getting the extra money to gamble away? Maybe he was getting it from Lieselot. In the 3 months leading up to the murder, $24,000 had been withdrawn from Lieselot's bank account. Steven admitted going to Lieselot's house at some point on November 12. In addition, multiple witnesses placed him at her house that day. Moving to the exculpatory factors, there were no witnesses to the murder, no video. Steven had an alibi for some of the time around when the victim was murdered. No physical evidence connected Steven to the murder. For example, his DNA was not found on the shaving bag discovered at Thompson Point. As far as the hammer that was found in the same area, Robert's account is difficult to believe. Again, Robert was the owner of the hammer who said that he loaned it to Steven. Robert identified the hammer from a photograph that briefly flashed on his television screen when he was watching the news. Just from seeing that image, he was able to identify the hammer as the one Steven never gave back to him. Out of all the hammers in the world, and out of the many hammers Robert had owned, that one hammer was special to him. Robert must have really loved that hammer in order for it to have been embedded so well into his memory, as if it had been hammered into his head. The police put Robert's tool belt, screwdrivers, and chisels in a lineup to test how well he could identify his own property. He was unable to identify any of those items as belonging to him. It sounds like Robert really had a particular affinity for the hammer and no other tool. For Robert, it was always hammer time. Steven's banking records were examined. No excess cash deposits were identified, although if he was stealing money, he wouldn't necessarily put that in a bank. Steven did lie about his gambling activity, but maybe he was simply trying to hide it from his wife. Many people in the area knew that Lieselot had cash stored around her house. Maybe one of these people committed the murder. When considering the evidence in this case, do I think that Steven Fennell was guilty? I believe that Steven was guilty in reality, but I do not believe that he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. He placed himself at the scene and had a motive, but it's difficult to get past the fact that no DNA connected him to the crime. The Crown probably placed too much emphasis on the idea that the hammer was the murder weapon. I guess one could say their focus on the hammer may have freed Steven from the slammer. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Steven was angry, violent, manipulative, impulsive, irresponsible, grandiose, vindictive, greedy, and had a sense of entitlement. He saw Lieselot as an easy target to fund his gambling habit. At some point, Lieselot figured out what Steven was doing, and he killed her to keep her silent. It's also possible that he went over to her house to search for money, they had some type of argument, and he murdered her in a rage. Steven was incredibly fortunate that no physical evidence tied him to the crime scene. Based on how many times he was convicted for other offenses, this might have been the first time Steven ever actually escaped justice. He was by no means a sophisticated criminal. Now moving to my final thoughts. When Steven was released from custody, he said that it was yogurt day in prison. He was enjoying his yogurt when a guard came and told him he was to be released. Steven's initial reaction was anger because he was basking in the harmonious symphony of creamy and tangy notes, and he believed the guard was joking with him. One can only hope that someday the Crown finds enough evidence to forever reunite Steven with his beloved cultured dairy product. Those are my thoughts in the case of Steven Fennell. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. they always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.